Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sybil Byrne. I'm from McCabe Journey Barnes and the IPI MSP committee. It is my pleasure to moderate the final session and welcome you all to the IPI Launch and Learn CPD on marine spatial planning. So, over the course of the last 7 weeks, we have welcomed a variety of speakers from academia, the private and the public sector. We've also learned a lot from key public sector actors. Together, we've gained insight into our future as planning practitioners and a better understanding of arising issues in the marine area. We hope that you've enjoyed the last 7 weeks and that you had instructive lunches. This week, to conclude the webinar series, we are going to have a practice-based session. The objective of last week and this week's session is to present how planners work toward delivering blue growth and some of the aspects this covers. Today, we are welcoming two well-known planners. First, we will be speaking with, Des Cox of AirGrid will be talking, and second, Brian McCarthy of Clare County Council. As in the previous weeks, I would like to reiterate my thanks to the IPI for their support, the support it has offered. And in particular, I would like to thank Sean and Shelley for their administrative advice and the backup they provided. We would like to also thank the Department of Housing for supporting the CPD series. All of the previous week's presentations are now available on the website, on the IPA website. And again, this has been made possible by funding provided by the Department of Housing to upgrade the website. As this is our final launch together, I would like to express my sincere thanks to my colleagues Terry Prendergast, Dr. Heather Ritchie, Sinead O'Malley, and Ali Robinson, and to all of the speakers who contributed to the series. And importantly, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the MSP committee for their support in putting the webinar series together. So just to give you an idea of how this will work out, if this is the first webinar you're attending, our speakers will make their presentation for about 25 to 30 minutes. And then we will have 15 minutes for a Q&A. You can type in the chat box, and at the end I will select a few questions for each of the speakers. We'll be finishing at 2:15 sharp. At the end of the session, there will be a quick survey, so if you can respond to that to give us your feedback. So first, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Des Cox. Des has led the planning and environment team in AirGrid, the Irish electricity transmission system operator, since 2010, overseeing its project development and consenting activities, as well as critical electricity transmission development and plan making. In particular, Des led the multi-jurisdictional planning and consenting of AirGrid's Celtic Interconnector project, both onshore and offshore. Des was previously operational director of RPS planning, as well as a senior inspector in onboard Planola. So today, Des will be discussing the Celtic Interconnector, which is a high voltage power line between Ireland and my home country of France, being developed jointly by the Irish and the French grid operator, being AirGrid and RTE. The project has now passed through the planning and consenting process and is in the construction phase. There are many lessons that have been learned along the way, and this presentation looks at the experience and common themes for future integrated land and marine spatial planning. And it's over to you, Des.
Thank you, Sybil, and I hope you can all hear me. I'm just going to share my screen, so you might tell me if you can see that.
Yeah, we can, Des. That's fine. If you want to start the slideshow.
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. That's
Great.
good.
Thank you very much indeed. When I was writing the title that I got, Lessons Learned, it always reminded me of that Simpsons where Homer at the end says, Marge, my friend, I haven't learned a thing. So hopefully we have learned something with this. Maybe it's an ongoing learning. I'm going to keep going because of time. And really, I suppose, having spent so long with the Celtic Interconnector, I always assume that everybody knows what we're talking about. But so I'm going to just give a brief overview, and then a brief, I'll take you through the actual elements of it and into the process itself. But as Sybil mentioned, it's a joint project between the French and the Irish transmission system operators, EirGrid and RTE. The main aspect of the cable is that it's a 700 megawatt cable, which in power terms, it's easier to say, look, it'll supply power to about nearly 500,000 houses, and in terms of equivalent. It's the first real big test for EirGrid's offshore space, and as we're moving more and more into the offshore, it's been a good test, because this cable is 575 kilometers long between the northern Brittany coast and the Cork area. So in terms of everything that we have had to learn in terms of how to deliver offshore in that sort of deeper and more unpredictable space, we do currently have our east-west interconnector between the east coast of Dublin in the shallow waters and the UK, but this was a whole different area. And why is it being undertaken? EirGrid, the transmission system operator, actually is mandated to explore and develop opportunities to interconnect our national grid with other systems. You'll have even heard, and it's a well-publicised north-south interconnector. That's an interconnector between the jurisdictions of Ireland and Northern Ireland, which actually operate in two different systems. And we are now exploring wider connectivity with Europe. When you look at RTE, it's huge. Obviously, when it looks into France, it has multiple interconnections to different countries. And I'm going to show a couple of images. That Ireland remains a peripheral island from a grid network as well as from a spatial network. But when we look at the scale of development in RTE, it's really a case of looking to link the EU together in a more through interconnection for a number of different reasons, and I'm going to go on to those now. And the first is really about competition because of our peripheral nation. And interesting enough, the UK aren't that far off us either, even though they have greater interconnections to the likes of France and Belgium. You can see just as a snapshot there that Central Europe has much lower electricity prices, trading prices, because of the ability to interconnect, to buy fuel from the cheapest power sources. Ireland has a bottleneck because of its need to produce power within the country itself, and also then with linkages only to the UK, so that our prices for electricity power are significantly higher, as you can see. And so the interconnection across into Europe, the European markets, will bring downward pressure on prices. But the other thing we want to do as we develop and continue to develop demand and develop in our land use spaces and develop intensities of infrastructure and other development, we need an electricity supply that will match this. So what interconnection means is that we have an assured ability to import power when required and to export power when we have an excess. Thirdly, of course, the sustainability. What it does mean is that, building on my last point, is that we can now put and will be able to put a significantly greater amount of renewable energy. Electricity, as I think everybody knows, must be used. While we're looking at technologies to store it, in general, it must be used as generated. This will allow us to rely much greater on renewable sources of energy, but then to import when those renewable energy sources cannot deliver, for example, in calm conditions, when wind turbines simply don't provide enough power or the sun doesn't shine. So it gives us both a secure area, but also allows us to target our energy mix onto the renewable sources. One of the more interesting sources, I think, of the power of the project is we are providing a fibre connection as part of this, not a commercial one, but a fibre connection link. It'll be the first direct link between Ireland and mainland Europe. At the moment, we depend on the UK, and that means we're sharing it with an awful lot of other individuals and customers and cities. But it allows us again to provide probably an enhanced connection. We've done this on our East-West project and it's worked very successfully. So now we are looking to do that as part of the Ireland-France, the Celtic Interconnector. For all these reasons, the project was deemed a project of common interest, a PCI, under the European regulation. And this is both in terms of sourcing of funding, but also you can see there, just in terms of interconnections, the green is at the higher capacity, but even at the brown, the lower capacity, you'll see the amount of interconnection throughout Central Europe, and indeed extending up into more peripheral regions such as Scandinavia. And what you can see from that is that there is no understanding of where power comes from. If you are a resident in Germany, you're the transmission system operator buys the cheapest power, and that operates on a single electricity market. At the moment, if you take away that link that's been shown there at the moment, the Ireland-France link, there is currently a small link to Northern Ireland and across from Northern Ireland to Scotland, known as the Moyle Interconnector, and our east-west link. They're the only links we have. So this is the importance of this project, and that's why it was designated a project of common interest, to link us in, and in particular after Brexit, to link us from being the only isolated EU country into a more interconnected system. What is the Celtic Interconnector itself? While it sounds like a power line, again, it sounds like I should know, everyone should know this. So let me take you through it. And really what it is, I suppose, is primarily, say, a subsea high voltage direct current link. That direct current is a form of power. There's two types of power. The alternating current, or AC system, is what most countries, including Ireland, will operate on its grid. And direct current, a bit like a battery, where it goes from positive, negative, or other in the other direction, but it goes in a single direction, is generally used for longer or more complex linkages and connections. So whether it be the length of it, hundreds of kilometers long, or whether it be, as in both in this case, a subsea option, a DC link is required. That then requires a converter station at either end to convert that power from DC into AC and vice versa as it travels. And then the power goes from that converter station into the existing grid. So going from left to right on this, we have identified the Knockgraha substation in North Cork City as the location for the connection point. It has a compound with it. You'll see what's called a CSE compound. That's called a cable sealing end, and it's where the interconnector ends and the existing grid infrastructure owned by ESB Networks begins. That's the interface between the two. There's an 11-kilometer AC link underground at 400 kV. That's our highest voltage on the network, and that will extend along the public road network to the converter station at Ballyadam near Carricktool. I'm going to show you through this as we go, just images of what's there. And from that station where the power is converted, a DC link, then direct current link, underground cable, will link to Claycastle, which is the beach at Youghal, and a landfall. That's an onshore cable. It will then be transitioned to an offshore, a much, obviously for obvious reasons, a much more robust cable, submarine cable, that will travel through Irish waters, the UK, EEZ, and into French territorial waters, where it will meet the same infrastructure on the other side, the landfall, the converter station, and ultimately into the grid. This is Claycastle in Youghal. And so a lot of what the planning was about was saying, now that we've established those parameters, from an environmental, from a local planning point of view, where should we be siting the infrastructure? So a number of alternative landfalls were looked at, and ultimately this has won out because of the soft sediment approach. So a lot of the onshore decision making was informed by offshore survey work. I think that'll be the same as we continue into the marine spatial planning, where we do away with this distinction and look at this end-to-end activity. But that green box there is a transition joint bay. It'll all be underground. There won't be anything visible above ground as the cables come in, and that DC link extends from the transition joint bay and out from Youghal. That's the full extent of what it looks like. If we're looking at HDD, horizontal directional drill, so we'll actually drill under the beach. But at the moment, and what's consented is just a simple trench. The pipe is laid down. It's a single cable, so you'll see that black pipe there. That's ducting with the cable in it, and the beach is then reinstated. And as I say, it's dug in deep. Even the kids with the bucket and spades won't get near this, but it's well protected under there. The Celtic Interconnector then travels westwards from Claycastle Beach at Youghal and through along the N25. A number might know that road is the road between Rosslare and Cork. A very busy road. We're working very closely with TII, and we have done them with the Roads Authority through Cork, because we want to make sure that our activities, even if they are relatively temporary and minor, we generally on major roads be able to develop about 50 meters a day. We'd lay the cable, so this is about 30 kilometers or so. We'll continue through that, but also to make sure we are with other competing uses, particularly road uses. It does pass through two main villages and towns, Killa and Castlemartyr, on the way. And while we were only putting in a trench of approximately a meter wide or less than a meter wide, as I say, we do need to consider how we would get around the towns and through the towns with the least impact. So with a lot of early engagement with the regulatory authorities, with the planning authorities, with the road networks, and with landowners, we've agreed off-road routes there, the yellow route around Killa, where we'll actually avoid the town and therefore avoid its impact on the main street, particularly where it has what you can see is nearly a 90-degree bend in the middle of the main street. And similarly in Castlemartyr, the cable will travel to the north of the town on undeveloped lands. Again, there was an interesting one. There was work with the Roads Authority because they are examining routes for a bypass of Castlemartyr. It's quite a congested bottleneck on that N25. So that route should avoid any impact on alignments for the Castlemartyr bypass when it comes. But again, you can see what needed to be avoided there. That's through early engagement and with stakeholders, with landowners, all of whom are willing to accommodate it. This looks a busy slide, but as we come west out of Castlemartyr, we meet Middleton. Middleton has recently been in the news, obviously through severe flooding. And so, but that was one of the main reasons that we want to avoid the national road network. The other, and I'll show you on the next slide, in terms of that pink blobby looking area to the west of Middleton, where TII are planning for a major upgrade of the N25 between Carrigtwohill and Middleton. So this routing, we said we in collaboration with the Roads Authority and with TII and with others, said, let's take it onto the local road network here. We avoid Middleton. We avoid any potential impact of having a high voltage cable through a future construction site, as the road and the road network there is being developed for other competing uses. And the Celtic Interconnect then lands at the converter station site, which was identified from a number of different alternatives at Ballyadam, just northwest of Carrigtwohill there. The converter station is probably the biggest piece of infrastructure that we'll be building. So this is the IDA lands at Ballyadam, and you'll see the cables as they link in, but ultimately it's a large industrial scale building where the DC lines and circuits enter and AC lines exit. And the power is transformed in the middle of it. That's what it looks like in practice. That's our EWIC station, the East-West Interconnector station at Woodland in County Meath. It's essentially unmanned, but it does have other maintenance, but it's a very, very large structure. And as part of that, you'll see the smaller, flatter building. These are very important buildings as well, and they simply are spares buildings. So as part of this, what happens if something goes wrong with this connector? We actually have to have spare circuitry, spare cabling, there's a spare transformer going into this at a significant cost, but we cannot contemplate that there's damage or that there's some reason that the interconnector can't work, and we have a long time when the interconnector is out of action. So that has to be part of the planning for this. Ultimately, from Ballyadam then up to Knockgraha Station, the AC route travels in the local road network. And that essentially is a trench of in or around 2 meters in width. Again, on the local road network, it will require road closures. So the engagement and the working with the planning authorities and working with local stakeholders and landowners is key part of our work in EirGrid, long before an application was put in to find the routes, to find diversion routes. In the marine space, it would appear to be very different. It's open water, but then when we looked into the actual planning of this and what's involved in this, and anyone who's been involved in offshore since, you'll know about the environmental designations that are particularly around the coastline of Ireland, but elsewhere. So we found routes through 2 years of survey activity on marine vessels that can avoid environmental areas, while in generally picking up the best geological profile. Obviously, you want to lay this into the softest sands as we can, but it also needs to be a protected route. Interesting, you just come up with different, every time I say, well, the hard part was on land, this is the easy part, you just come up with different constraints, and I think we all know that. But just for his example is noting, you can see the pink lines there. There are 18 crossings that we will have to do of existing cables, fiber optics, broadband pipelines, gas pipelines, and they all have to be designed into the overall interconnector delivery. And of course, you're doing this in quite a deep water profile as well, of over 100 meters. So it's just a different range of constraints and challenges to be overcome. The main way that it's done, this is the DC route, if you remember, the single cable. They are the cable and its spare. You'll see the size of that compared to what maybe you saw on the beach. They're much bigger at the submarine because it needs such protection. So the cable and a spare is laid down with the fiber optic cable. It's bundled all together. You see that on the screen, on the left-hand side of the screen. And then for the most part, where it's sandy, it'll be either plowed into the ground, into the seabed, and then covered over afterwards, or left to natural covering. And the alternative to that, where it can't go underground or into the seabed, rock will be placed over it, which ultimately becomes from a nature perspective, becomes a new home for marine wildlife. But in the most part, it's used sparingly and to try and keep this as natural as possible. There are some interesting things that you have to consider as we move ahead, and in particular, a lot of work and a lot of focus is on UXO, unexploded ordnances. This was obviously a World War II battle site, so we could find a lot of unexploded material, bombs and things like that. And so we just, the amount of and attention to detail on this in order to protect the line is down to a very, very fine level of detail. This, just for example, is the scale of what we're talking about, the Nexans Aurora. It's the largest of its fleet, and will just fling out the cable on a huge drum, and you see it in the middle there, and just lets it lay.
Sorry, there's just 5 minutes left.
I'm going to race through it all. Thank you very much indeed, because thanks, Sybil. As we moved out to the development phase, the planning phase, we also had to consider from the outset the contractor phase. This is our chief executive, Mark Foley, with you'll recognize members of the government there. It's a huge contract space. And what we're looking at as the contractors came together and to develop this, the planning team were also involved since long before, a year before or more before the planning application, to build, to make sure that the contractors knew what they were building. I'm not going to spend time at this, but really you are looking at for 3 to 4 years of development contracts. What does that mean for the planning process at the early stage? EirGrid, in terms of planning and consenting, and a number of you might be familiar with this, but we operate a 6-step framework. And at each of those spaces, we had to look and say, what is it that we do in this space? Whether it be looking at options, looking at development, looking at the planning process, what does it mean for the ultimate delivery date? and this is what we came up with. I should say Valerie Brennan, who might be on this call from RPS, was seconded, and she worked with us on this. But the end date of the first half of 2027 was hugely important. And that's why I say when government Taoiseachs and all are applauding each other for getting it, you have to work backwards to a planning profile. So our approach to strategy and our approach to timelines was very significant as part of this, and that's one of the biggest lessons of the whole lot. We had multiple jurisdictionals in Ireland, England, and France, and offshore applications, onshore applications, licenses in all three jurisdictions that our team was coordinating. I won't spend again any time on this, but you could see the amount of work that was involved in doing what planners do best, which is strategy, and saying, what is it that we need to do? How does this work out? Here's realistic timelines. Rather than letting the engineering side of things, run this, became very much around the planning and the work that needs to be done to make sure that we were able to hit those deadlines and timelines. And I'm delighted to say that we did. We hit them. Targets were met, marks were met, and it became, with the collaboration and with the work that we did with all those other bodies, with An Bord Pleanála's PCI unit, with An Bord Pleanála SID, the planning authorities involved, and it continues to that. So finally, and Sybil will be glad to see that finally, what's happening now, we're in the construction phase. We are still we agreed a phased discharge conditions with Cork, which means that site investigations can work while we're still maybe in discussions around the final conditions regarding station development. So that means that development can work in a phase work. We have used the 146B process, particularly around that cable sealing end I mentioned, and also providing new access to that compound. These are things that couldn't have been envisaged when we put in the application. One very interesting, well, it's only a planner could say it's interesting, but we found is that within about 18 days after we got our foreshore license, or sorry, before we got the foreshore license, the MAPA Act came out, which actually is set that we needed planning permission for everything that we've simply got. That's been dealt with, and I'm delighted with our colleagues in DEC and the Department of Ireland, Paul O'Neill in particular, that's been overcome, that there's now a provision within that Act that development with a foreshore license that was subject to EIA and AA doesn't require the separate permission. But that was a big piece of work because it put all of uncertainty on the Celtic, and financiers were very nervous about that. And we're also looking at the offshore licensing. So it's an ongoing planning process. My team is also involved in construction communications, a new area for me. We only ever did planning and consenting and then handed our projects over to ESB. This is where we're taking it to the end now. So we're getting involved in communications, and also, as you can imagine, in detailed design, we're looking at different issues, different detailed surveys that say, well, maybe the ground isn't what we thought it was. We need to look at new technologies that'll assist in that. These are all ongoing things, but the site is in observation. That's the site that you were looking at in a map, and when you see it in scale, you realize this is one of the biggest projects that I'll certainly be dealing with, and the issues that arise from that. So my final slide is really about what have we learned from this, and in particular, what is learned that we can take into marine spatial planning. And 100% at the top, that collaboration, the amount of work that we were able to do with others, get advice from others, maybe advise. Nobody has the answers, and I particularly say that with the greatest respect to likes of Mara looking forward, or in Bord Pleanála, why we would expect them to know everything simply because they're the decision makers. We need all to work together, to share our information, to share our learnings together. And this is why I think what the Institute is doing is really helpful in this regard. But also the clarity around legislative processes. We're getting that way with the maritime legislation, with the new bill. And then what I would say what you need out of it is strong policy support, whether it's for offshore, for the onshore development in the local area renewable energy plans, and not to ring fence either, but that they all flow one from another, so that the offshore renewables is part of possibly the local authority renewable energy strategies and the regional strategies and the national planning framework. Our skills as strategic planners shouldn't be underestimated here. Working backwards from an end result, what is it we need to do, and to work strategies flexible strategies so that we can lead engineering, not engine leading planning. Tail needs not to wag the dog. We used the structured approach. It worked really well, and all stakeholders knew where they were. That Celtic Interconnector project, the size and scale of it, gendered 37 SID submissions, of which about 17 or 18 were from prescribed bodies, and there was about 20 local objections. For a scale of that, I'll take that every day of the week. But it was because the understanding was very clearly, and it comes from what I've just put up, early engagement with the community stakeholders. They knew what was there. They bought into the project early. And really, it go back to my first part of collaboration, but the information sharing, whether it be marine information or knowledge around processes and at that statutory and stakeholder level, proved invaluable to us because we were into a place that we had not been before. And I've mentioned about the consideration of alternatives. We had to change our location of the converter station. It was going to be at Knockraha, but ultimately with community concerns, we were able to move it because we hadn't fixed ourselves too early. And that's my final one about having milestones, having targets, and working with others and people outside the area planning and environment. But also we had a huge pressure to make sure that our finances were in gear and reporting to Europe, who are giving us $500 million for it. So really the key lessons, Sybil, I'm just finished here, is saying is I think all these relate to marine spatial planning in exactly the same way. It's how we all can work better together. Nobody has the right answers. We all need to be part of this together. So thank you very much indeed for that, guys.
Thank you, Des. That was really insightful. And I think it was brilliant to see how much impact on land maritime development can have. It really shows that marine planning isn't just for a select few, it's for all planners in the system. Thanks very much. So now I would like to welcome Brian McCarthy. And I will first introduce Brian before he can go ahead. Brian McCarthy is a senior planner with Clare County Council with over 20 years of experience with the planning department. He has led full functions of the planning department, contributing to the preparation and implementation of the strategic integrated framework plan for the Shannon Estuary, which he will be talking about this afternoon. He is also a member of I'm getting mixed up, as well as a number of other marine-related initiatives and projects undertaken by the local authority. Brian is a council member of the IPI, and he is a member of the MSP committee. Brian, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Sybil, and I'm going to share my screen there and just making sure you can see and hear that.
Yes, that's fine, Brian.
Perfect. So I'll start if that's okay. And yeah, and thanks very much indeed. Thanks to the Institute for inviting me to speak. And I suppose at the outset, while I'm speaking here, in relation to the Shannon Estuary, there's a fantastic team that has been involved in this over a number of years, both within the planning department of Clare County Council, indeed, as you'll see later, across the entire region. And I suppose my presentation really is almost a reflection on the evolution of marine-related planning in the Shannon Estuary in the Midwest over the last 20 years, and focusing on it from a local authority planner's perspective. I suppose at the outset, it's no harm to be aware of Shannon Estuary and its extent. It's about 100 kilometres long from the Limerick City to the edge of it at Loop Head. There's about 500 square kilometres of deep water onto the Atlantic Ocean, and it's actually some of the deepest water ports in Europe. There's a fantastic network of towns and villages, and also Limerick City, and indeed in Shannon International Airport, it joins the estuary as well. It's also, from an environmental perspective, a hugely important site, a designated SPA, and also a number of SACs adjoining the estuary, as well as having a resident population of bottlenose dolphins and other Annex 1 species. So I suppose in many ways you can see there's a huge range and variety of competing interests and elements that need to be managed and managed sensitively. Again, like from an international airport down to our towns and villages and beaches, and as we mentioned earlier or later as well, renewable energy stations and coal-fired burning stations of Moneypoint and Tarbert. And I suppose a number of national key economic drivers, shipping and navigation, harnessing the energy resource that I mentioned as well, but also from a perspective of the west of Ireland, a huge tourism asset, both the area joining the estuary and indeed the estuary and waters themselves. There's a significant commercial fishing and aquaculture base as well. And also, as I mentioned, the Shannon International Airport is located adjoining the estuary. And as well, overlaid out amongst all that, there's a huge range and variety of environmental assets and indeed constraints as well. As one often realizes when one takes up an element of research, you're not the first, or one is not the first to do it. So in fact, there's been a huge range of previous reports and studies on the estuary going back to the early 60s. In particular, the Litchfield report that looked at the wider Midwest and Limerick City region, examined the potential of the Shannon estuary to play a part in rural or regional development, all the way through to the early 2000s when the Shannon Development also did a study. In many ways, as a local authority planner, and like I said, it's almost an evolution of land use planning in County Clare. We were, I suppose, spoiled with riches in County Clare for decades, and I guess the focus on land use planning and development plans focus mainly on landward side, mainly on assets such as the Burn, Shannon Airport, as I mentioned, but also the emerging at the time in the late 90s and early 2000s of wind energy developments, and obviously through the Celtic Tiger, actually managing development of our towns and villages and populations. So in some ways, we could have been accused of maybe almost turning our backs onto the estuary. And I guess in particular, our elected members, we must pay a huge credit to them, always had asked that we should focus to a greater extent on the estuary. So I guess we first did that really through the preparation of the 2011 Clare County Development Plan. And I guess at that time, if one may remember, I suppose strategic environmental assessment was generally well bedded into land use planning at that stage, but maybe AA and appropriate assessment was only emerging. So on foot of the requests from our elected members and indeed from our own management team, we decided again to focus to a greater extent on the Shannon estuary. So we designated in around 10 or 11 sites along the Shannon estuary in County Clare for maritime related development, and put that out on a draft development plan. And I guess, and I'll see there in April 2010, we received a submission from National Parks, or Department of Housing at the time, highlighting the fact that we cannot look at the Clare side of Shannon estuary in isolation, but we actually had to go and look at the entire estuary and to make it a comprehensive and overall plan for the estuary, which I suppose within the confines of a very strict county development plan period, we found it quite difficult to be able to do. So I suppose our solution was to actually go and prepare an integrated framework plan for the Shannon estuary. And again, like I said, all these competing interests, mainly our own county development plan, the timeliness on that, but also, as I mentioned earlier, the multifunctional and variety of disciplines and variety of competing interests in the estuary warranted an entire master plan by itself. So I suppose we set up an established SIP steering group of about 20 different agencies, which was a huge undertaking by colleagues of mine and previous colleagues as well. And in particular, the role of the local authorities in terms of Limerick and Limerick City and Limerick County Council at the time, and Kerry County Council, but also the statutory agencies such as Shannon Fines Port Company, Airgrid, Shannon Airport Authority, and the EPA. A huge undertaking, but I suppose a testament to the collaborative approach of the planning and the planning system. And at the time, it was the first interjurisdictional marine framework plan for a variety of areas in Ireland, and it was actually, yeah, like I said, the first of its kind. But in particular, and I touched on it earlier, the role of strategic environmental assessment. Not only, I suppose, did we comply with strategic environmental assessment and appropriate assessment, but in fact, SEA guided and led the whole entire process hugely through it. So I guess the SIP really it managed all the infrastructure, national or natural and indeed national assets such as the airports, but also it had to we took a very environmentally based approach and kind of sifted through the various layers of environmental data and competing interests, and it undertook a huge mapping exercises, and indeed we had RPS to guide us through all that, and looked at the range of environmental factors across the estuary, while also trying to stimulate economic growth and opportunities for economic development, tourism development as well. And again, what I've shown here is an example of, I suppose, one of those layers, a map of the shipping movements and the anchorages within the estuary. And again, all these were layered to arrive at a very detailed strategic integrated framework plan for the Shannon estuary. And I guess it comprises of essentially 3 volumes, the written statement, but hugely backed up by the SCA and the appropriate assessment. But also we were very keen, and it emerged very quickly in the entire process, I suppose, of the importance of a strong plan-led system, and that the scale of the industry we're looking to target required a certain amount of actually guidance. So each of these sites that we've identified, not only have we identified it, but we set out the environmental parameters and criteria that a developer must meet to develop on those sites. And I suppose that's been very beneficial to the industry as the industry has evolved. So I guess the Shannon Estuary, or the SIP plan, essentially commenced in 2011 and took 2 years and concluded in around 2013. And I know our colleagues in Limerick and Kerry, and indeed ourselves, undertook variations to incorporate the SIP into their own statutory plan. And I suppose in many ways, traditional planning policy or planning authorities would have almost ended it there and said, look, we've undertaken a very ambitious and important 20-year strategic integrated framework plan for the Shannon Estuary, and just left it at that. But I suppose we didn't want to do that, and we focused hugely then on implementation. And I suppose that's the role we would see local authorities, indeed the planners, becoming more and more involved in it. And I suppose out of that SIFP, bringing together all those 20 agencies, we set up 2 groups, a marketing group and, importantly, an environmental group that actually worked to focus on the delivery of the SIFP. And not only did we do that, but we actually started to shape national and indeed regional policies, as I'll touch on before, or I'll touch on next. And also we went indeed further and actually started looking at research and data gathering. In Clare County Council, we actually progressed further as well, and we set up and established a separate company to drive economic development along the estuary, and I'll talk a bit further on that, and that's actually the Clare Maritime Economic Zone. And I suppose we've also established a number of small projects as well. So like I mentioned, like I said, on completion of the SIP, we were actually anxious not to just end it there and to actually try and shape and influence national policy. And actually we were delighted that the SIP was a case study in the National Planning Framework. Also then it was, I suppose, emphasised and endorsed in the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy. And again, that's as I'm sure everyone is aware, not only is that a spatial strategy, but importantly, it's also an economic strategy. And again, that was a huge boost for the recognition of the SIP, not only in terms of spatial land use planning, but also economic development planning as well. It was included and recognised in the Regional Enterprise Plan. But not only that, I suppose in the programme for government, there was a specific reference to the role and importance of the Shannon Estuary in economic development across the region. And actually arising from that programme of government, as required, a Shannon Estuary Economic Task Force was established in April 2022. And again, that brought together a number of agencies led by the Department and Government to again focus on maximising, almost on the back of the SIP, which identified the spatial and economic elements of the Shannon Estuary, but also to see then the downstream economic benefits, and to I suppose create jobs and harness the huge potential that was now becoming very evident in 2022. And again, that's a key document that was published in July of last year, and actually talks about creation of almost 10,000 jobs. And interestingly, the task force talks about and indeed recommends the establishment of an IDA type of agency to similar to what IDA did on land for creating jobs, that this type of an entity would actually drive offshore renewable energy development as well. Arising in the last number of years, or in the last 2 to 3 years, Moneypoint and the ESB have announced a Green Atlantic Energy Hub. As I touched on the estuary, there's two fossil fuel burning stations, including Moneypoint, the coal-fired burning station in County Clare, and that is actually moving towards, very quickly towards a renewable energy hub. And indeed that is, I suppose, trying to transform and move away from the coal-fired burning to a more sustainable and renewable energy hub, based on the huge resource of offshore wind and renewable energy. I suppose the energy created and anticipated from that, I suppose, can also be used for storage, and there is huge and ambitious plans to convert that energy into hydrogen, and also backing up what I said earlier about not only that the Shannon Estuary and the west of Ireland would be a source for renewable energy generation, but it actually could be used for manufacturing, and that the area around Money Point, as we mentioned, that the Shannon Estuary is a huge depth, that this would be an area for manufacturing and assembling the large offshore turbines that will be inevitable coming down in the next 10 to 15 years. Shannon Fines Port company, again, based on the reassurance that the SIFP gave them, and in particular the environmental undertakings that we had done as part of that process, undertook a Vision 2041, a master plan of their own, and really that really reinforced that Shannon Estuary has a capacity to be a major European logistics and trade centre, as well as contribution to the Irish economy. But in particular, it established 4 key principles and 4 key facilities along the entire estuary. And again, just reflecting the importance that not only each company has on their own area, but actually on the recognition of us all working together to deliver the best for Shannon Estuary. And that was to identify and Shannon Fines Port as an area for pre-commissioning for the turbines, that those would then be almost floated out to Money Point, and as I mentioned before, would be assembled at Money Point and at various other locations. But also that Shannon Fines Port would become the operations and maintenance base for operations in the west of Ireland, offshore renewable, and again creating a huge amount of jobs. One obviously can't ignore the other ongoing renewable energy developments that's happening at the moment. And again, just I suppose an example of the interest that we are having off the coast of County Clare and North Kerry for offshore wind energy developments. And again, just making reference to the draft ORDP that's on consultation at the moment, indeed, which we've all fed into as well. And again, we're seeing that through all the studies and collaboration over the last decade, that we want to see Shannon Estuary as being the centre for providing the complete supply chain for offshore renewable energy developments as well, both just the manufacturing, the staging, and operations, and in particular creating huge socio-economic benefits for the Midwest and West of Ireland region as well. I touched on as well before there, and I hope you can still see that there, is that we've checking up. That we as a local authority then went a bit further and started looking at how we can actually, as a planning department, and indeed in collaborating with other local authorities, make it easier for inward investment. And I suppose one of the initiatives we undertook was to have pardon me, sorry, the reception dropped there, was to prepare and start a data gathering exercise. So we were hugely conscious that at the time, and as is common, it was that individual developers were going assessing their own sites and not taking a kind of a collaborative or a wide-ranging approach to the data gathering in the estuary. So I suppose Clare County Council, in particular my colleague Sheila Downs, brought all the agencies together and commence a process of surveying the entire data for birds, and that's a huge, and probably the first time it's ever been done over, I think, 2014, 15, 16 and 17, undertook a full water birds usage survey from the entire estuary. And I suppose that's a huge data resource to enable any developer who wants to come into the estuary to have this huge amount of data already provided for them. I suppose we're also conscious that that data not only is available for developers, but also to all other agencies as well. But again, this is a huge resource and a huge proactive, I would suggest, a huge proactive approach that we as a planning department undertook. And again, it's to try and enhance the competitiveness of Shannon Estuary to attract inward investment. And again, like I said, what we did was for I won't say a modest, but actually a relatively small amount of money. We have this huge land bank, or huge bank of data going back a number of years to enable it to be used as well. Then, as a local authority, we identified a site in Cahercon, and we were conscious to I suppose, you know, one can often when it comes to renewable energy, be focusing on the large scale or international renewable energy companies, but there was actually a small and medium enterprise on Shannon Estuary making tidal test devices, and at the time they were actually manufacturing the devices, but taking them overseas to test them. So what we did in County Clare was we encouraged and worked in collaboration with them and the department to establish a small tidal test device centre in Cahercon. And at the moment we're working through the 4th floor licence to again encourage them and encourage others to use Cahercon for small scale tidal test devices centre as well. As I mentioned earlier as well, in terms of tourism, the focus on the estuary is not just for economic development, but also in tourism. And again, almost with the Ryder Cup in mind in 2027, we're actually focused now on sustainable cruise tourism into the estuary. I think in around maybe 10 or 12 cruise ships a year come into Shannon Fines Port. But actually we wanted to look and examine to see if we could actually expand the benefit of cruise passengers to not just to Limerick and Kerry, but also to County Clare as well. So we're working with Shannon Fines Port to look at maybe a concept where the cruise ships would berth mid-estuary and then be ferried or by tender either north to County Clare or south to Limerick and Kerry as well. And again, to do this in a sustainable manner as well. And then finally, a project that we're quite proud of as well in County Clare, and that's a maritime training centre. And what I'll do is, rather than me talk about it here, I'm kind of conscious that at the moment we have, or many local authorities would be preparing RRDF applications. Indeed, what I have here is a presentation we did as part of an RRDF application to the department last year. And on foot of this, and indeed the great work by my colleagues, we obtained 3.5 million. So what I'll do is I'll play this video. And again, this shows the importance of planners expanding our skill sets, and also to show how we can go from plan-led development down to very real projects on ground. So I'll play this.
The Kilrush Maritime Training Centre looks to redevelop a derelict building and an underutilised boatyard for a specialist maritime training and research facility, creating rural and maritime jobs. The facility will provide training to international standards, meeting the existing demand for marine training and in particular the emerging demand from the offshore renewable energy industry. The training centre will also include a laboratory and classrooms, providing a focal point for marine biology research on the Shannon Estuary, which is designated SAC and SPA. Ireland and the Shannon Estuary has a proud tradition of maritime industry and seafaring, with many working across the world's oceans in industries such as oil and gas, cruise, cargo ship, marine research, sightseeing tours, and more recently on the rapidly expanding offshore renewable energy industry. The requirement amongst all who work on or near water is the need to comply with marine safety standards. A maritime training centre in the rural maritime town of Kilrush on the Shannon Estuary will be a much needed addition to an industry that is forever expanding. The use of RRDF funding will directly create employment and upskilling, adding to the value proposition of the Shannon Estuary in Ireland to attract marine and offshore renewable energy investment, helping to create and transition Ireland to a competitive, low-carbon, climate-resilient and environmentally sustainable economy. The project will see the purchase and renovation of a vacant commercial building, Creek Lodge, the construction of infrastructure to include a pool building and fireground, the installation of an offshore wind transfer area, gravity davit and rescue craft, and building on the existing town centre's first policy will also include improvements to public realm. Importantly, the project, located in the town centre with direct access to Kilrush Marina, will regenerate the area physically and economically. Following positive engagement with the town team and local tourism operators, a reimagined public realm is proposed, highlighting the location of the site on the line of the Old West Clare Railway and on the Wild Atlantic Way. The open nature and design of the building, with a shared canteen and public coffee shop, will also encourage footfall and interaction between the education and training centre and the local community and labour force, encouraging and inspiring non-seafaring trainees to upskill and take up positions at sea. The training centre would enable the provision of mandatory maritime training courses and value-added training for over 1,200 persons per year. Trainees will be predominantly Indigenous, serving the existing demand from fishing and other maritime industries. It will also serve the requirements for the offshore renewable energy sector, including the requirements of ESB at Moneypoint, transitioning from fossil fuel burning to renewable energy, as well as the 6 other proposed offshore wind farms and wave and tidal companies looking to develop off the Clare coast. The centre will provide a research and training base for the hundreds of third-level marine biology students and companies who visit the area and the 100 kilometres of Shannon Estuary each year, undertaking field research. There are obvious linkages with Irish Whale and Dolphin Group, located close to the site. The 1,200 visitors staying in local accommodation, contributing to shops and service providers will have a year-round impact on the area. The centre will also create a focus for the existing ecosystem of small maritime enterprises, bringing value-added employment and spin-off opportunities. project will be delivered by a Strategic Economic Delivery Unit with expertise in planning and project management in the maritime development sector. A number of operators have been shortlisted to operate the Maritime Training Centre and deliver the training and accreditation to the highest international standards. With increased focus on the importance of renewable energy in both Ireland's and Europe's energy portfolio, more and more opportunities are arising for communities in rural and coastal areas. With over 4 years of project development to date and the compliance of the project with a range of EU, national and regional policies, the opportunity is now to deliver this innovative rural and marine-based project. Our RDF funding will enable Clare County Council and its partners to deliver this innovative approach to rural development. My name is Brian McCarthy, Senior Planner. Thank you for your consideration.
Yeah, and again, I suppose the reason I wanted to share that, again, like I said, I was conscious that at the moment a number of local authorities are applying for RDF funding. That was just a submission we made to get our RDF funding. But also in particular, it is that the planners have been involved in this. The planners are involved in the vision, writing the policy, doing all the drawings, creating the vision, and indeed working through the business case, and in terms of collaboration with other agencies to try and very successfully do so, create very real and very meaningful opportunities for socioeconomic development in County Clare. So I suppose in terms of, by way of conclusion, I almost started back in 2010. And I suppose that's one thing I would urge people, our planners, to remember, is that we have to have the long-term vision to see and to keep that vision very clear in our minds, and to recognise that sometimes it takes years to develop. Also, I guess, to adapt to circumstances, like I mentioned at the start, what started off as being a problem at a very tight development plan stage, where we had to do an entire, or we were required to do an entire plan for the estuary, that has actually proved hugely beneficial. And in particular, the collaboration, bringing 20 different agencies around the table together, I suppose reflects the skill sets that we as planners sometimes may often take for granted, but actually that collaboration is key. But also the multidisciplinary approach, like I mentioned at the start, we're very beneficial, we're very lucky to have a wide range of skill sets within the planning department and within Clare County Council and across the estuary as well, and in particular blessed with a number of very skilled people as well. I suppose the skill sets that we as planners have, and that actually almost are required to update every so often, being from policy making to renewable energy and maritime skills, and indeed this course, as people has mentioned, has been hugely beneficial. But also the resilience that is required, because this isn't hasn't been plain sailing, if you pardon the pun. But again, if we go back to that long-term vision, it's hugely important that we keep that. And I suppose communication and the ability to be able to manage competing interests and to manage and balance issues. So look, but by way of conclusion, I just want to thank the IPI again, but also in particular thank the colleagues of mine and previous colleagues that have worked on this SIP for Shannon Estuary and all the range of projects that have derived from that. Thank you. Over to you, Cyril.
Thank you, Brian.